Far away at the edge of the galaxy, there was a small, forgotten mining outpost. It had been abandoned for centuries. Most civilizations had already forgotten it ever existed. No one visited it, and the Galactic Council had marked it as completely empty and harmless. Life there had ended long ago, or so everyone thought. Then, one day, something impossible happened. A distress signal came from the outpost. Not just a simple call for help, but a signal that repeated in a strange pattern, almost like a heartbeat. It was weak, but unmistakable. A signal coming from a place that should have been silent for hundreds of years. At first, the Council couldn't believe it. Their experts checked the coordinates again and again. All records said the outpost had been abandoned. There were no life forms, no ships, no energy readings. Everything there was dead. Yet the signal kept repeating. Every few hours, it broadcast the same message over and over, almost like it was alive. Rumors began to spread fast across the galaxy. Some said the signal was a trap, a lure for explorers to get caught in some unknown danger. Others believed it was the work of a lost civilization, sending a message that had survived centuries. Nobody could explain it. Even the oldest historians couldn't remember anyone ever hearing about a signal like this before. The Council finally decided they had no choice. They could not ignore the warning. A small fleet was assembled to investigate. It wasn't a large force, just enough to quickly reach the outpost, confirm what was happening, and leave if it turned out to be dangerous. These ships carried the best technology the Council had, equipped with sensors, shields, and communication systems that could reach across light years. The fleet's journey was long. They traveled through empty star systems, past planets that had never been touched by any civilization, and through asteroid belts that had existed since the galaxy was young. The deeper they went, the more unsettled the crews became. Something about this mission felt different. Most of them had faced danger before: pirates, storms, hostile creatures, but this was new. A place that was supposed to be dead was sending a signal as if someone, or something, wanted to be found. When the fleet finally arrived, they found the outpost floating in the black void, almost invisible except for the faint glow of the signal. It looked as if time had frozen there. The buildings were still standing. The landing pads were empty, with no footprints or signs of life. Nothing moved. Yet the distress signal continued, steady and rhythmic. The fleet began to scan the area. Their sensors detected strange anomalies. Parts of the outpost seemed to emit energy readings that shouldn't exist. Systems on the ships began to act strangely, as if the outpost didn't want to be measured. Some instruments went dark for minutes at a time. Lights flickered, screens glitched, and data readings changed by themselves. The crews whispered about it, unsure if it was malfunction or something alive. Curiosity and fear mixed in every officer's mind. They decided to send a small team inside the main building. The hallways were empty, silent, and cold. Dust floated in the weak artificial lights. The team walked carefully, checking every console, every door, every panel. Then, in the center of the main control room, one console came to life. It flickered, hummed, and then displayed a single line of text. "We tried to warn you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The team froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. How could a place that had been abandoned for centuries suddenly send a message? Who were they, and what had they tried to warn? The fleet immediately sent an urgent report back to the Galactic Council. Their voices were shaky, their words short, as they described the impossible. They explained the signal, the strange energy readings, the console message. The Council's chambers buzzed with confusion and fear. They had expected a simple malfunction, maybe some lost alien device, but this was different. This was something alive, something with intent. As the fleet prepared to leave, the impossible happened again. On long-range scanners, a massive object appeared, moving toward the outpost at incredible speed. The crews had never seen anything like it. It was huge, larger than any known ship, and its design was unlike anything catalogued by the Council. Smooth, black surfaces reflected the faint starlight, and strange energy pulses ran along its hull. Everyone on the fleet froze. Panic spread quickly, but no one could think of what to do. Orders were shouted, alarms rang, and communication channels filled with urgent messages. But even the most experienced captains felt fear they had never known. The ship didn't respond to hails, and it didn't slow down. It simply moved, deliberate and calm, toward the outpost. The crews could only watch in silence, unsure whether this was the end or the beginning of something they could not imagine deep in the control rooms of the fleet. Some began to speculate. Could it be a species that had been hiding for centuries? Could it be the ones who had sent the distress signal? Or was it something else, something far older and more dangerous than anything in the galaxy's records? The outpost's console continued to blink, repeating its message. We tried to warn you. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt small, fragile, and unprepared. A single distress signal from a forgotten outpost had reminded everyone that there were forces beyond understanding. Forces that had been waiting, silently, for centuries. Forces that were only now making themselves known. And at that moment, every officer, every captain, every council member realized the truth. Whatever was coming was not just a threat. It was something that could change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Something that would challenge the very idea of life, survival, and control in the galaxy that the outpost had not called for help in vain. It had sent a warning, a heartbeat of alert through the vast darkness. And now the galaxy was about to see why. The fleet held its position, shields up, weapons ready, hearts pounding. Outside, the massive ship continued its approach, silent, unstoppable, and full of intent. The crews understood one thing clearly. They were no longer the hunters. For the first time, they were being observed. And what watched them was unlike anything they had ever faced. Time slowed as the distance closed. The black void seemed to stretch, every star a pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. The outpost, the forgotten place, was about to reveal the truth behind its message. And the crews of the fleet, once proud and confident, now waited in terror for what would arrive. For in that moment, a distress signal from a long-dead outpost had done something extraordinary. It had awakened the galaxy to a force it was not ready to face. And it had made one thing perfectly clear. Some warnings were never meant to be ignored. The fleet lingered near the outpost, frozen by the sight of the massive ship approaching through the emptiness of space. No one spoke. No one moved. Every sensor on every ship seemed to register a presence that was both ancient and intelligent, a force beyond anything they had ever known. Even the most experienced officers felt their confidence crumble. Something about this ship was wrong in ways they could not define, and the silence that came with it was terrifying. Slowly, the fleet advanced toward the outpost, though each move felt measured and cautious. The outpost itself remained still, like a piece of forgotten history waiting for the future to arrive. Dust particles drifted in its corridors, untouched for centuries. Broken equipment hummed faintly, powered by some lingering energy that refused to die. Every step the fleet's small investigation team took was filled with unease. It felt as if the outpost was aware of them, watching, waiting for them to understand something they could not. Inside the main control room, the investigation team examined every console, every panel, and every door. The flickering screen with its cryptic message, "We tried to warn you," still glowed faintly in the dim light. The words seemed heavier than they should have been. There was urgency in them, a warning that no one in the fleet fully understood yet. Outside, The massive ship continued to approach. It moved in a way that defied any known physics, almost gliding through the vacuum with a smoothness that suggested control over forces the fleet had never imagined. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving it a presence that was both solid and unreal. The closer it came, the more the fleet's instruments failed. Cameras froze, shields fluctuated, and energy readings spiked in strange, unpredictable ways. The fleet commander, a seasoned officer with decades of experience, gave a calm but firm order. Maintain formation. Keep scanners on the ship. Do not engage unless ordered. His voice was steady, but those standing nearby could see the tension in his eyes. Everyone knew this was not a simple encounter. They were witnessing something far beyond their understanding. On the outpost, the console continued to pulse, repeating the same message. It almost seemed alive, syncing with the rhythm of the approaching ship. The investigation team noticed something strange. The console was responding to the ship's presence. Faint energy lines ran from the outpost to the edge of the landing bay, forming a pattern that none of the officers recognized. It was as if the outpost itself was signaling the massive ship. Suddenly, a strange vibration ran through the hulls of the fleet's ships. It was not caused by any movement in space. They were an empty void, but a resonance that seemed to come from the massive ship itself. The vibration was subtle at first, but it grew stronger, sending shivers down the spines of everyone aboard. Crew members reported a feeling of pressure in their chests, as if the ship was not just approaching them physically, but mentally, reaching into their very perception. Communication channels lit up with panicked voices. Commander, sensors are failing. Life readings are fluctuating. The outpost, it's reacting. One officer shouted over the alarms, fear evident in every word. The commander raised a hand to silence the room. He took a deep breath. We observe. We report. Do not panic. Stay calm. This is why we are here. Despite the order, panic spread quietly among the ranks. No one had ever seen a ship behave like this, a vessel that moved with intention, not blindly through space, but as if it were alive. Every human on the fleet felt a growing sense of insignificance. For the first time in centuries, they were not explorers or conquerors, they were witnesses. And they were unprepared for what they were witnessing. Then, as if sensing their hesitation, the massive ship slowed. It hovered at the edge of the outpost's orbit, far enough to be visible in its entirety. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. It was easily 3 times larger than the largest ship in the fleet, and its design suggested a species that valued both function and artistry. Smooth curves, interwoven patterns of unknown material, and glowing lines ran across its hull. Pulsing faintly in response to the outpost, the fleet attempted to hail the ship. This is the Galactic Council fleet. Identify yourself, the commander said, voice steady despite the rising tension. Static answered. Then, unexpectedly, a deep, calm voice filled every communication channel. It was human clear, precise, and filled with authority, but unlike any human voice the fleet had ever heard. Stand down, it said. This sector is quarantined. The words sent a shiver through everyone. Human? How could it be human? Humans had been missing from the galaxy for centuries. According to every record, they had disappeared long ago, retreating into isolation for reasons no one fully understood. Yet here they were commanding presence, control, authority, and a ship that defied every law of physics the fleet had ever known. The investigation team stared at each other in disbelief. The message was simple, yet it carried weight. They had been trained to respond to alien threats, unknown life forms, and even hostile encounters. But this was not hostile, yet it demanded respect in a way that no threat ever had. It was a warning, yes, but also a reminder of the human legacy that the galaxy had long forgotten. the massive ship did not advance. It simply hovered, almost surveying the outpost and the fleet as if assessing the situation. The energy fields around the outpost began to shimmer faintly, and the crew of the fleet noticed something remarkable. The strange anomalies on their sensors aligned perfectly with the patterns on the outpost. It was as if the outpost itself and the ship were communicating in a language of energy, beyond words, beyond sound, beyond understanding. Inside the control room, the console flashed again. New lines of text appeared beneath the original message. Do not approach. The threat you cannot see is waking. The investigation team read the words aloud, each syllable making their stomachs tighten. A warning. But a warning of what? The fleet had no idea. They had expected a distress call, a simple plea for help, perhaps a malfunctioning system. Instead, they had been met with a presence that was alive, aware, and commanding attention. The commander of the fleet made a decision. He ordered the ships to maintain distance and continue observing. No one was to fire, no one was to make sudden movements, and every attempt at scanning was to be careful, methodical, and respectful. The human voice on the communication channels had made one thing perfectly clear. This was not a situation to be treated with arrogance or aggression. Hours passed. The fleet watched as the massive ship remained in place, unyielding, silent except for the occasional pulse of energy from its hull. Crew members began reporting strange feelings, anxiety, tension, and a sense of being watched that went beyond instruments. Some swore they saw fleeting shadows moving along the hull, though cameras showed nothing. Others felt a warmth or presence in the corridors of their own ships, as if the human presence was reaching across space itself. Then, a subtle change occurred. The massive ship began to move closer to the outpost, not in a threatening way, but deliberately, almost as if it were guiding the fleet to understand something. The energy fields around the outpost grew stronger, forming arcs of light that danced across the void. The console inside the outpost pulsed in rhythm with these arcs, and the words on the screen shifted slightly. We have waited for this moment. Listen carefully. No one spoke at first. Every human aboard the fleet felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Here was a civilization, long thought extinct, returning in a way that reminded them of their own smallness. They were no longer in control. They were not the explorers. They were observers. And what they were witnessing was beyond comprehension. The fleet realized something crucial. The distress signal had not been a simple call for help. It had been a warning, a reminder, a message left in time, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. The human presence, ancient, powerful, and precise, was here to protect, to oversee, and perhaps to judge the readiness of the galaxy. And as the massive ship settled into position near the outpost, the fleet could only wait. They had arrived expecting answers, but they had found more questions than they could handle. They understood one thing clearly. Whatever had been sending the distress signal had a purpose far greater than any mission they had ever undertaken. The galaxy, silent and vast, held its breath. And in that silence, the humans aboard the massive ship waited, their intentions unknown, their presence undeniable. The fleet had come to investigate a signal, but they had encountered something far larger, a reminder that some forces in the universe were not to be underestimated. And some warnings were meant to last centuries, patiently waiting for the moment when they would finally be understood. And in the dark void near the abandoned outpost, the first signs of understanding began to form, though no one aboard the fleet could yet grasp the full meaning. They only knew one thing. What had arrived was far more powerful than they could imagine, and it had been waiting for them. The fleet had been watching the massive ship for hours. It remained in the void near the abandoned outpost, almost motionless, yet its presence felt alive, aware, and intelligent. Every sensor reading, Every pulse of energy and every flicker of light suggested that this was no ordinary ship. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to defy the rules of physics the fleet had relied upon for centuries. Then, slowly, the massive ship began to move again. But this time, it wasn't approaching the fleet. It moved with purpose toward the outpost. The human investigation team, inside the abandoned structure, noticed the energy field surrounding the console shift and flare. Lines of light formed patterns, stretching from the outpost into space, connecting with the hull of the massive ship. The outpost seemed to be activating something. The crew aboard the fleet felt it immediately. Instruments went haywire. Cameras displayed nothing but static, but crew members swore they could see shapes moving across the massive ship's surface. Some reported hearing low, vibrating sounds in their ships, like whispers in a language they could not understand. Even the bravest officers felt their pulse quicken, a mix of awe and fear that left them frozen in place. Then a voice came over the fleet's communication channels. It was calm, controlled, and unmistakably human, but far deeper and stronger than any human voice had a right to be. It carried authority, power, and a strange weight that made the officers on the fleet feel small and insignificant. You are observing what you were never meant to find, the voice said. Do not interfere. Stand down and witness, or risk consequences you cannot imagine. The fleet's commander stared at the console in disbelief. Humans? Here? After centuries of being considered extinct, isolated, or mythical, humans were not only present, they were commanding, aware, and in control. Every record the Galactic Council held about humanity was now outdated, incomplete, and wrong. These were not explorers, not diplomats, not refugees. This was something else. Something prepared. Something powerful. On board the massive ship, the energy pulsing across its hull grew stronger. The outpost's console flickered and displayed a new message. We are the Guardians. You were warned. Time has arrived. The crew aboard the fleet could only stare. The words made little sense in the moment, but their meaning was clear. Humanity had returned, not to negotiate, not to beg for peace, but to assert a presence that demanded respect. The massive ship moved closer, and the fleet finally got a full view. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Smooth, black surfaces stretched across its hull, broken only by lines of glowing energy that traced complex patterns. Its size dwarfed even the largest ships in the fleet by far. Every angle, every curve, suggested design with a purpose beyond aesthetics. It wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress, a weapon, and a beacon all at once. As the fleet watched, a portion of the hull shifted, opening like the petals of a flower, revealing inner structures that glowed faintly. The display inside their own ships reflected the ship's power, and for a moment, the fleet realized they were seeing the inside of a human warship built for purposes beyond their comprehension. Then the voice spoke again, steady and commanding. You may have heard stories of humanity's disappearance. We did not vanish. We retreated to protect the galaxy from threats you cannot face. We observed, we prepared, and now the time has come to remind the galaxy of what we are capable of. The fleet was silent. No one moved. Every human aboard felt a mixture of disbelief and fear. These were not the humans they had studied in history books. These were a species that had evolved, grown, and mastered technology far beyond anything in the known galaxy. They had been silent for centuries, and now their silence was over. On the outpost, the console flashed again, displaying another line. The threat you cannot see is awake. You are never ready. The energy fields around the outpost pulsed, and the massive ship's glow intensified. It was as if the two were connected, sharing a power that the fleet could not measure, a coordination that left every officer speechless. The commander of the fleet finally regained enough composure to speak. Report. All sensors, all systems. "What are we dealing with?" His officers scrambled to respond, but the words came out in stutters. "Commander, readings are fluctuating. Cameras cannot focus. Energy spikes are beyond our comprehension. We are detecting nothing. It's like the ship is alive, somehow, and aware of us." Even the most seasoned officers understood the implications. They had faced warships, rogue planets, and massive alien beasts, but this was different. This was intelligence on a scale that dwarfed everything they had encountered. It was not just technology. It was a presence, a conscious force, and it had been watching, waiting, for centuries. The massive ship moved closer to the outpost, but not threateningly. It hovered above it, aligning with the patterns of energy that stretched from the outpost's console. Lines of light connected the two, forming a lattice that pulsed rhythmically. The voice came again. "We return not as friends, not as conquerors. We return as guardians. Observe and understand. Do not interfere." The fleet tried to scan again, but their instruments failed completely. Every system froze, then rebooted, then showed inconsistent readings. It was as if the massive ship and the outpost were beyond the capabilities of their sensors. It was not just technology. They were witnessing something that operated on a level they could not even define. Inside the massive ship, humans, though not the humans of old, moved with calm precision. They did not speak over the fleet's channels, but the presence of their technology, their energy, and their control was undeniable. Every movement of the ship, every pulse of light, suggested coordination beyond the understanding of any other civilization. The fleet began to understand something crucial. The distress signal that had brought them here was not a simple call for help. It was a beacon, a marker, a warning. It had been sent centuries ago, knowing that someday someone might arrive to witness what had been hidden. It had led the fleet to this moment, not for diplomacy, not for alliance, but for observation. The commander realized the truth in a moment of clarity. We are not here to engage. We are here to witness, to understand. That is our role. Nothing more. The massive ship remained above the outpost, its power radiating across the void. The fleet could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. Humans, long thought extinct, had returned with a presence that reminded every civilization of their fragility. For centuries, they had believed humanity was gone. Now they knew better. The console inside the outpost flashed once more. We are not your enemy. We are the shield. Do not mistake absence for weakness. Watch, learn, prepare. The fleet had no choice but to comply. They could not interfere. They could only observe, and with each passing moment, they understood that what had arrived was far beyond any threat they had known, far beyond any civilization's power. Humanity had returned not to plead, not to negotiate, but to remind the galaxy of its presence. And in that silence, in the void of space, the fleet realized something that would stay with them forever. Humans were not lost. They had never been absent. They had been preparing, waiting, and watching. And now, the galaxy was seeing for the fall. First time in centuries, the power and purpose of a species that had quietly shaped the universe from the shadows. The massive ship pulsed with energy. The outpost shone faintly beneath it, and the fleet hovered in awe and fear. For the first time, they were witnesses to something truly extraordinary. They understood that the warning had not ended. It was only beginning. And the galaxy, vast as it was, would never be the same again. The massive ship hovered silently above the outpost. Its enormous hull absorbed the faint starlight, and lines of glowing energy ran across its surface like veins. Every pulse of light seemed deliberate, as if the ship itself were alive and aware of everything around it. The fleet watched in a mix of fear and awe. For centuries, humans had been considered extinct, missing or isolated, But now they were here, commanding space itself without firing a single shot. Then the voice spoke again, calm and authoritative, filling every channel simultaneously. You are witnessing what you cannot fully comprehend. We are here to warn you, not to attack. But heed this message carefully. The threat you cannot see is awakening. It is ancient, it is relentless, and it will consume everything in its path if left unchecked. Every officer on the fleet felt a shiver run down their spine. A threat? The galaxy had threats, yes, but this voice spoke of something different. Something that could not be measured by sensors, scanned by instruments, or studied in archives. Something beyond the reach of any known civilization. The investigation team inside, the outpost, was still standing near the console, their eyes wide at the words displayed. The threat is not visible to your instruments. It is not bound by your understanding of life or energy. We contain it, but it stirs. You must listen. You must understand. One officer finally broke the silence, speaking through a trembling voice. Why us? Why show this now? The voice responded, slow and deliberate. Because the time has come. You have been observing the remnants of humanity, long thought lost. Humanity withdrew not out of weakness, but to contain what the galaxy could not face. The outpost you discovered sent a signal not for help, but for warning. It was never meant for you, yet you arrived. You must see what was hidden. The fleet watched as the massive ship released small energy pulses toward the outpost. The pulses formed a web in the void, stretching outward like invisible threads that glimmered faintly. The console in the outpost pulsed in sync with the ship's energy. It was as if the two were communicating in a language beyond sound and sight. The crew felt a deep unease. The warnings were clear, but the threat remained invisible. Every officer knew that whatever they were being warned about could not be scanned, could not be predicted, and could not be fought with ordinary weapons. It was a danger the galaxy had never faced. The human voice continued, explaining more of the unimaginable. We have fought it before. The remnants of its influence exist in scattered sectors, hidden and dormant. We contain it through isolation, through vigilance. But containment is fragile. A single misstep, a single disturbance can awaken it. The mining outpost you discovered triggered a signal that reached across centuries. It is why you are here now. To witness, to learn, to understand. Officers exchanged worried glances. They had expected a distress signal, a malfunction, or even a trap. None had expected a revelation like this. Humanity, thought to have vanished, was not only alive, but had been guarding the galaxy against a threat they had never imagined. The massive ship moved slightly, and the fleet sensed the power it carried. The energy pulsing from it was immense, but it was controlled, precise, and deliberate. There was no hostility, but there was a warning. Humans were capable of defending the galaxy. But the effort required immense focus, preparation, and caution. Inside the outpost, the console displayed a new message. We have observed your species for centuries. You are not ready to confront this threat. Do not interfere. The consequences would be catastrophic. Observe. Learn. Do not act unless instructed. The fleet's commander understood immediately. Their role was not to fight. It was not to intervene. It was to witness and learn. For centuries, the galaxy had assumed humans were gone. Now they realized humans had been working in secret, protecting the universe from dangers no one else could see or stop. Then the human voice delivered a warning that shook everyone aboard the fleet. The threat is awakening. It moves where you cannot detect it. It consumes everything in its path. We contain it now, but our vigilance cannot last forever. You must understand, if containment fails, entire systems, entire civilizations, entire sectors of the galaxy could be lost. The mining outpost triggered a ripple. You must recognize the danger and remember this moment. You have been warned." The crew felt the weight of these words. It was one thing to face known enemies or natural disasters. It was entirely different to be confronted with an invisible, unstoppable force that had been contained only by the careful planning of a civilization long thought extinct. The massive ship's energy pulses intensified, forming a protective field around the outpost. The fleet could see faint shadows within the energy web, shapes moving in ways that no life form they had ever encountered could. It was not aggressive, but the shapes hinted at immense power and precision. The fleet realized the humans aboard the massive ship had not only prepared for this threat, they had built technology, weapons, and strategies to contain it. The voice continued, explaining the limits of human knowledge and preparation. "We are not gods. We are guardians. The threat exists beyond your comprehension, but we have survived. We have contained it. We act with patience, precision, and foresight. You must understand that absence is not weakness. Silence is not ignorance. Humanity has been watching and waiting." The fleet felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that humans were here to protect the galaxy. Fear that even humans, powerful as they were, could be stretched thin. What they were witnessing was proof that the galaxy was fragile, and some forces could not be stopped without extreme measures. The console in the outpost pulsed again, flashing new words. "Do not disturb. Containment is delicate. Every misstep can awaken what we guard against. You have arrived at a moment of history. Observe and remember. The galaxy depends on it." Crew members looked at one another in silence. They understood the magnitude of what they were seeing. The humans, long thought lost, were not returning as explorers or diplomats. They were returning as protectors, guardians, and a force beyond understanding. Their warning was clear. The galaxy was not safe, and some threats could only be contained, never destroyed. The fleet's commander spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We are not here to fight. We are here to witness. We are here to learn." Every officer nodded in agreement. The gravity of the moment was not lost on them. The human warning was not just about the threat. They were learning the lesson that humanity had spent centuries preparing to teach: vigilance, patience, and respect for forces far beyond their understanding. The massive ship remained above the outpost, its glowing hull casting faint light over the fleet. The human voice spoke one final time, slow and deliberate. "We have returned not to conquer, not to rule, not to beg for attention. We have returned to remind the galaxy that some threats exist beyond perception. We contain them, and we will continue to do so. Observe, understand, and do not interfere." The fleet understood that their role was now clear. They would leave the outpost and report what they had witnessed. They would tell the galaxy of the return of humanity and the warning they had delivered. But they would also understand that no civilization could act recklessly. The invisible threat remained, and only humans had the knowledge and technology to keep it contained. As the fleet prepared to depart, the massive ship pulsed once more, the energy from the outpost aligning perfectly. The warning had been delivered, the lesson had been learned, and the galaxy, vast and silent, now knew that humans had returned, not for themselves, but to protect everything the galaxy had built. And in that silence, as the fleet drifted away from the outpost and the human ship, every officer carried a single thought: the galaxy was fragile, and for centuries it had been protected by a species it had almost forgotten. Humanity's warning was clear, and it would echo through time. Vigilance is essential. Preparation is life. And some threats are too great to confront without understanding. The fleet had witnessed history, and every human aboard those ships knew one thing: the galaxy had been given a second chance, but only because humans, long thought extinct, had returned when the time was right. and the warning would not be forgotten. The fleet had remained near the abandoned outpost for hours, watching the massive human ship hover in silent authority. The warnings had been clear. Humans, long thought extinct, were back, not as explorers or diplomats, but as guardians of the galaxy. They had spoken of a threat that could not be seen, a force beyond comprehension, one that could consume entire star systems if it were ever unleashed. But no one aboard the fleet could truly grasp the scale of what humanity had been containing. It was invisible, silent, and patient. The outpost had been abandoned centuries ago because the humans had been fighting a war that no one else could even detect. The fleet realized something chilling. The distress signal they had followed was never a call for help. It was a warning, a signal left in time to mark the moment when the threat could begin to stir again. Then, without any warning, the void around the outpost began to shimmer. Energy waves rippled through space, subtle at first, but growing steadily, visible only on the sensors the human ship allowed to function. Shadows began to move where there should have been none. Shapes flickered in the darkness, barely perceptible, yet full of intent. The fleet watched in silence, understanding that what they were witnessing was the first sign of the threat. Awakening. The human voice came over the channels once more, calm but filled with a weight that made every officer on the fleet hold their breath. It is beginning. You cannot see it clearly, and your instruments cannot detect it. Do not attempt to engage. Stand down and observe. This is why we are here. Humanity contains what you cannot. Watch carefully, learn, understand the cost of interference. Suddenly, one of the fleet's sensors picked up a disturbance. It was not a ship, not a solid object, but a ripple in space itself. The energy from the massive human vessel reacted instantly, forming shields and countermeasures that spread out across the void. Lines of energy laced the area around the outpost, intersecting in patterns that no one aboard the fleet could comprehend. It was as if the humans had created a net in space, a barrier designed not to destroy, but to contain. Crew members stared at their screens in disbelief. Shapes, faint but menacing, flickered across the holographic displays. Energy readings spiked wildly and then dropped to zero in moments. It was as if the invisible force was testing them, probing their sensors, but failing against the human defenses. Officers realized for the first time that this threat could not be fought with conventional weapons, conventional strategies, or conventional understanding. The humans had prepared for something beyond imagination. The human voice explained calmly, "This force existed long before most civilizations arose. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be destroyed with ordinary methods. We contain it, carefully and deliberately, using knowledge and technology that your species cannot yet comprehend. Every misstep risks awakening it fully." The fleet felt the weight of these words. For centuries, civilizations had feared wars, pirates, and cosmic disasters. But none of that mattered against this force. This was not just an enemy. This was a cosmic predator that existed in the gaps between matter and energy, in the places no one could reach, waiting for the moment it could strike. Then the massive human ship shifted. It moved around the outpost with calculated precision, releasing pulses of energy that formed temporary barriers. Each pulse caused the faint shadows of the threat to distort, stretch, and then vanish for moments. The fleet watched in awe as they realized the humans were not only containing the threat, they were corralling it, guiding it into a prison of energy patterns that kept it from spreading inside the outpost. The console flashed new lines of text. "You see now why absence is not weakness. Humanity has been guarding the galaxy for centuries, silently. Every step, every retreat, every hidden action was part of this effort. The threat moves in ways you cannot detect. You must remember that power alone does not save civilizations. Preparation, vigilance, and patience do. One officer spoke, voice trembling. "Commander, what are we seeing? How can humans hold something that our instruments can barely detect?" The commander shook his head, understanding the truth in silence. "This is beyond us," he said quietly. "We are not observers of a ship. We are observers of a civilization that has mastered forces we cannot comprehend. They are not here to fight. They are here to guard. And what they guard is the galaxy itself." The human ship pulsed again, and energy arcs connected the outpost with the void around it. The faint shadows began to retreat slightly, bending along the energy net. It was not aggression. It was containment. The threat moved, but the humans anticipated each motion, countering it with precise, calculated measures. Every officer on the fleet realized that this was the result of centuries of planning, technology, and understanding that no one else possessed. The voice spoke again. Calm and deliberate, the outpost triggered a ripple. It disturbed what we have contained for centuries. Our return was not to destroy, but to ensure containment. You are witnesses now. You must understand, the galaxy is fragile. The forces within it are not all visible. Some threats exist beyond perception, beyond comprehension, and beyond the ability of most civilizations to handle. The fleet watched as the invisible threat began to retreat, corralled back into containment by the human ship's energy fields. The shapes flickered, twisted, and finally disappeared from the sensors. The ripple subsided, leaving only the glowing patterns of the human energy nets and the faint pulse of the outpost console. Crew members breathed heavily. The danger had not been eliminated. It had only been restrained, guided back into the invisible prison that humans had maintained for centuries. And yet, for the first time, the fleet understood the magnitude of what humanity had been doing in secret. They had not been missing. They had been fighting battles that no one else could see, guarding the galaxy in silence while others believed them gone. The voice came one last time, delivering the final lesson. You have witnessed what few have ever seen. Humanity's absence was deliberate. Our silence was for protection. The threat exists, it is contained, and it will continue to be contained. We act with patience, knowledge, and vigilance. You have been warned. Remember this. The galaxy depends on it. The massive ship began to withdraw slightly, hovering in place above the outpost. Its pulses of energy diminished, but the patterns remained, maintaining containment. The fleet watched in silence, absorbing the enormity of what they had witnessed. They understood, finally, that humans were not only alive, they were the shield against a force beyond imagining. Inside the outpost, the console pulsed faintly one last time, displaying a single line. We are the Guardians. Do not forget. Do not interfere. Observe and prepare. The fleet commander ordered the ships to maintain formation, not moving too close, not interfering. The lesson was clear. Humans were in control, and any attempt to act without understanding could have catastrophic consequences. Every officer knew they had been part of history, witnessing the return of humanity and the containment of a threat that no one else could face. For centuries, civilizations had feared the unknown, but now they understood that some threats could not be faced with force, diplomacy, or exploration alone. Some threats required guardians, patience, and understanding. And humans, long thought lost, had returned as the ultimate shield. The fleet recorded everything, every pulse, every shadow, every energy fluctuation. They would tell the story of humanity's return, the invisible threat, and the warning that had been delivered. But they also knew the galaxy itself would never be the same. Knowledge of the threat alone would change how civilizations thought about security, survival, and power. And as the massive ship remained above the outpost, silent but vigilant, the fleet realized one final truth. Humans had returned not to conquer, not to rule, not to negotiate, They had returned to protect, to guard, to contain what the galaxy could never face alone. The invisible threat had revealed itself, and humanity's presence had ensured that it would remain contained. For now, the fleet held its position, awestruck, humbled, and more aware than ever of the fragile balance that sustained the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, they understood the true cost of survival and the quiet, unyielding power of a species that had mastered what others could not even see. And in that silence, in the void near the outpost, the lesson was clear. Vigilance is life, preparation is survival, and some threats are too great to confront without understanding. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy had been given a second chance, protected, contained, and watched over by the species it had almost forgotten. The fleet had remained near the outpost for days, observing the massive human ship and the strange energy patterns surrounding it. Every crew member aboard felt a mix of awe, fear, and respect. They had witnessed something extraordinary, the return of humanity, long thought extinct, not as explorers or diplomats, but as guardians of the galaxy. They had seen the invisible threat awaken, and the humans contain it, with a precision that no one else could hope to match. The human voice came over the fleet's channels one last time. Calm, deliberate, and commanding, it carried a weight that made every officer feel small. You have witnessed what was never meant to be seen. The threat is contained for now. We have returned not to rule, not to conquer, but to remind the galaxy of what we are capable of and to ensure the survival of civilizations that cannot face the unseen. The fleet's commander understood immediately. The humans had not come for themselves. They had returned to deliver a warning, to demonstrate their power, and to remind every civilization that survival depended on knowledge, vigilance, and preparation. This was a message to all who could hear it. The galaxy was not safe, and some threats could only be restrained, never destroyed. The massive ship shifted, and its energy pulses formed a lattice of light across the void. The outpost's console flickered in rhythm with the human ship, forming patterns that seemed almost alive. Crew members aboard the fleet could see shadows, moving within the lattice shapes that were not solid, but seemed to respond to the humans' control. They were witnessing containment in real time, a force so powerful that it could not be fought directly. Humanity had learned to manage what others could not even detect. The human voice continued, slow and deliberate. The galaxy is fragile. You have seen the threat. You have seen our response, and you have learned the lesson. Absence is not weakness. Silence is not ignorance. Preparation and vigilance are survival. You must remember this. Officers exchanged glances. They understood the gravity of what they had witnessed. For centuries, humans had been thought gone, lost, or mythical. Now they had returned, not to reclaim territory or demand power, but to protect, to guide, and to contain forces beyond comprehension. The fleet realized that the galaxy had been safeguarded for centuries by humans who had worked in the shadows, quietly ensuring that civilizations could continue to exist. Inside the outpost, the console displayed a final message. We have watched, we have waited, and now you have seen. Learn from this. Do not interfere. Do not challenge forces you cannot perceive. Observe, understand, and respect what has protected you for centuries. The fleet remained silent. Every officer understood that they were witnesses to history, to knowledge and power that far exceeded any civilization's expectations. They had arrived to investigate a distress signal, and they had found humans, a threat too great to fight, yet a force dedicated to guarding the galaxy itself. Then the massive ship pulsed once more, releasing energy waves that stabilized the outpost and reinforced the containment patterns. The invisible threat stirred faintly, but remained confined, unable to break free. The fleet could only watch as humanity demonstrated control over a force no one else could hope to understand. The voice spoke one final time, with a calm that belied the magnitude of the warning. Remember this moment. Humanity has returned, not to dominate, not to govern, but to protect. The threat you have seen is only one of many in the universe. Knowledge, vigilance, and restraint are your allies. Do not forget. As the fleet prepared to depart, the massive ship began to withdraw slowly, hovering above the outpost, but maintaining a protective presence. The energy lattice continued to pulse faintly, a reminder that containment was ongoing and fragile. The fleet knew they could not interfere. Any action could disturb what humans had carefully restrained for centuries. The fleet commander spoke quietly, almost to himself. We have witnessed history. We have seen humanity return, and we have seen their power. The galaxy is protected, but only because they have acted in silence for centuries. We must remember this lesson. Crew members nodded, understanding the depth of responsibility they now carried. They had seen the invisible threat, felt its presence, and understood that survival depended not on force, but on knowledge, patience, and restraint. Humanity had returned, remind them of the true nature of power and protection. The human ship pulsed one last time, and then remained silent. Its presence was undeniable, but it no longer radiated urgency. The fleet could feel the subtle shift. Containment was stable, the threat restrained, and the message delivered. Humans had returned, fulfilled their warning, and ensured that the galaxy had been given a chance to survive. The fleet slowly began to withdraw, recording everything, documenting the patterns, and preparing to report to the Galactic Council. Every officer understood that this was not just a story of survival, but a lesson that would reshape how civilizations approached the unknown. Humanity had returned not for glory, not for conquest, but to protect. Their warning would echo through time. Vigilance is life, preparation is survival. And some threats are beyond comprehension. As the fleet moved away from the outpost, the massive human ship remained in the void, a silent guardian watching over the galaxy. The energy patterns surrounding the outpost pulsed faintly, a testament to the ongoing vigilance required to contain the invisible threat. Crew members watched in awe, humbled by what they had witnessed, and aware that they had seen a civilization that operated on a level beyond imagination. The Galactic Council would hear of this event, and civilizations across the galaxy would learn of humanity's return. But the lessons went beyond stories and records. They were lessons of humility, of respect for forces unseen, and of the responsibility that came with knowledge and power. Humans had acted in silence for centuries to preserve the galaxy, and now the galaxy had been reminded of their presence, their purpose, and their authority. Inside the outpost, the console pulsed faintly one final time, displaying a single message: we have returned. We watch, we protect. Do not forget. The fleet continued its journey back to the council chambers, the weight of the experience pressing on every officer. They had witnessed the invisible threat, seen humanity contain it, and understood the fragile balance that sustained the galaxy. For centuries, humans had been absent in body but present in purpose. Now they were back, and the galaxy had been given a second chance. And in the silence of space, as the fleet moved away, every officer carried a single thought: some forces are too great to confront without understanding, and some civilizations, long thought gone, return not for themselves, but to protect everything the universe has built. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The lessons were clear, the warning delivered, and the guardians in place. And as the void stretched endlessly around them, the fleet understood one final truth: vigilance, preparation, and respect for the unknown were not just lessons, they were survival. Humanity had returned, not to rule, not to fight, but to protect. And their presence would shape the galaxy for centuries to come. the fleet finally turned toward home, carrying the story of humanity's return and the invisible threat they had contained. The galaxy had been given a second chance, a chance to learn, to respect, and to survive. And for the first time in centuries, humans had reminded everyone why absence does not mean weakness. Silence does not mean ignorance, and some threats can only be restrained, never destroyed. The massive human ship remained above the outpost, watching, waiting, and guarding. Its purpose was clear, its presence undeniable, and its message unforgettable. The galaxy is fragile, and humanity has returned to protect it.